All right, with that, we will go to public comment. Have we received any requests for general public comment? And if not, Tara, if you will briefly unmute everybody in case somebody wants to speak.
If you beef up the employee reviews, and I recommend this a lot, particularly
we have somebody with background
evaluations.
Talking about employee reviews. Hopefully we are not under review at this moment. All right, hearing no public comment, we will go to item 3.1, which is the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. So people had a chance to review, and if so, I would take a motion to approve.
I move.
Was that Roger?
That was me.
And a second?
Second, Eric.
Eric's a second. Tara, do we need to do roll call on minutes?
Yes, you do.
All right.
I know I'm not Tara, but you do.
I understand, yeah. So I think Tara's fixing the recording. So we may have to.
Yes, I fixed the recording.
Okay, so we have a motion by Roger and a second by Eric for the minutes. Do you want to do a quick roll call? Please unmute in order to be called upon. Tara, you need to unmute.
Sorry. All right. Muting is getting tricky over here for some reason. I don't know why. All right, so we're gonna talk about the, we're doing the presentations first, right?
No, you need to roll call for the minutes approval.
Oh, roll call for the minutes approval, right.
We have a
Eric
motion
Adair.
by Roger, a second by Eric.
Eric Adair,
Yes.
Kathy Armitage,
Yes.
Matt Carpenter,
Yes.
Sandra Patel. Sandra? Did we lose Sandra? All right. Sandra does not answer. Stacy is not here. Stacy? All right. Roger Herring.
Hey.
Roy Marson, who's not here. Dan Masnada.
Yes, and I'm present too.
Perfect. Dennis Ostrom.
Yes.
Holly Schroeder.
Yes.
Steve Sly.
Yes.
Let the board show that, or let the record show that it passed.
Great. All right, so now we will go into the item 3.2, presentation by Jeff Barry. This is a draft technical, our next draft technical memo on the groundwater surface water interaction. So I'm handing that directly over to Jeff or to you, Tara. And at this point, please, everybody mute yourself except for Jeff. Great, we can see the screen. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, we can't hear you at this point. We can see your screen, but not, Jeff, we can see your screen, but not see you or not hear you. Looks like Jeff is reconnecting his audio. And unmute, Jeff. Shows you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
There you go. And you were showing your screen before, so I.
Okay. All right, let me get back to the screen. Can everybody see that? Great, okay. So I'd also like to introduce Tom Barnes with ESA. He's on the call as well. He's going to be talking about identification of potential GDEs. We have John Porcello, a hydrogeologist with GSI, also on the phone. He's done a lot of work with me over the years and contributed to the work we've done here. So I'm going to move through these slides. Next slide. All right. You saw this last time. I wanted to just show you where we are in our process. Last time we were talking about basin geology and groundwater occurrence. Today the topic is the groundwater surface water interaction. And we're required to look at surface water groundwater interaction and to identify GDEs as part of the SIGMA process. We all would agree that the river is unique and important in the basin. This work informs our water budget work and our groundwater modeling work, which is also required by the GSP. It helps us identify whether we have surface water depletion, one of the sustainability indicators that we're required to look at. And it helps us to identify potential impacts to GDEs resulting from groundwater management activities in the basin. So that's why we're doing this work. Next topic for the next meeting, the next presentation that we'll do at a future date is on the water budgets and modeling, which is later in the year. All right, so what we're going to talk about today, I'd like to first get into what is the meaning of interconnected surface water, and I'll show some graphics to illustrate that. I want to get into some of the information that we presented in our report on interconnected surface water and groundwater in the basin. Then we'll have an opportunity for questions. And then I'll turn it over to Tom Barnes with ESA to talk about their work on the potential groundwater dependent ecosystem identification, including next steps. And then after that, we'll get into some more questions. So first part of the presentation. So what is interconnected surface water and groundwater? Well, it refers to the surface water that's directly connected at any point by a continuous saturated zone and connected to that underlying aquifer, essentially. And I'll show you some pictures of what I mean by that. The interconnected surface water is a major source of recharge to underlying aquifers. Groundwater pumping can affect surface water flows in interconnected streams. Interconnected groundwater may support groundwater dependent ecosystems. And of course, I mentioned this, it's required by SIGMA to describe this. So the basic concepts that I want to present are, I'm going to show you three graphics that illustrate interconnection between groundwater and surface water. This first graphic is a gaining stream, and you can see here that groundwater is discharging into the stream. Groundwater levels are above the river level, or in the case of low flow conditions, above the thalweg, which is this base of the riverbed right here. I've shown also a graphic showing a monitoring well, which is one of the data points that we're going to be using and I'll be presenting. This well is hypothetically located near the stream, and you can see the water level, as indicated by that triangle, is located above the river level, or above the thalweg, or the base of the channel. That's suggesting that groundwater is discharging into the stream, and the stream is gaining. That discharge into the stream is variable depending on the groundwater depth and also the river stage. Going to a losing stream, okay? This is basically where the river is infiltrating into the aquifer system. It's still connected by a saturated zone below the river. You can see that in the little hypothetical well I have here, that triangle indicating where the groundwater level is at or below the riverbed elevation. It's indicating that the stream is losing to the groundwater system. And so we use the water level data in the well as a way of helping us determine whether the stream is gaining or losing. And this amount of recharge from the stream to the aquifer system is variable depending, again, on that river elevation and also the groundwater level. Now, we also have a case of what we call a disconnected stream. This is a case where the groundwater level or the groundwater table never intersects the base of the river, or never is connected directly to the river. There's an unsaturated zone in between the water table and the river. The recharge in this case is constant from the river infiltrating down into the aquifer. Now, all three of these cases, whether there's gaining, losing, or disconnected stream, actually occur within this basin depending on time of year and also depending on the type of year, whether it's a wet year, a dry year, or just a normal year. And we'll get into talking about that, but I just wanted to establish some basic things to start with here. So we have, as shown in this map, we have the main stem of the Santa Clara River in blue running through the basin. The basin boundary is this black line that you see surrounding the basin. That's DWR defined the basin that way. We have in colors tributary side canyons, Castaic Valley, San Francisco Canyon, Bouquet Canyon, Mint, and South Fork area. You can see I-5 running through here as kind of a landmark. These primary tributary watersheds are branches that feed that main part of the channel or main part of the basin, flowing from east to west. You've seen this before. This is our kind of a conceptual block diagram showing the relationship between the river flowing here on the surface. It is connected within this alluvial aquifer, this thin layer that you see here on the surface. And then beneath that, we have the deeper Saugus Formation. And just a couple things to point out here is that we see that on the east end of the basin, we have infiltration in the river, and it's for the most part, a disconnected river system from the underlying groundwater, and it's infiltrating into the alluvium that then infiltrates into the Saugus Formation. On the west end, we have the Saugus Formation groundwater actually discharges back into the alluvial aquifer, which then discharges into the river itself before it flows downstream across the county line into Ventura County. So conceptually, again, that's what's happening with the groundwater system and the river system. I'd like to kind of walk through the hydrographs, and I'm going to only walk through some of these. I'm not going to go through every single one of them in detail. So we basically, the process that we went through is that we identified selected wells within the alluvial aquifer along the Santa Clara River. And we selected these based on basically proximity to the river and also locations where we had a long history of water level data that could allow us to look at the response in groundwater levels to different climatic conditions, whether it be a wet, normal, or dry year. So these green dots represent the wells that we included in our study. We also estimated the river bottom elevation at the closest point to each of those wells using LiDAR satellite imagery data. And we also estimated the wellhead elevations that would allow us to then convert depth of groundwater to groundwater elevation so that we could compare elevations to elevations. Elevation of the groundwater surface to the elevation of the riverbed. And so we prepared hydrographs, and so we're comparing those hydrographs to precipitation trends, to Castaic Lake reservoir releases, and also to water reclamation plan or WRP discharges into the river, just to try to see what kind of correlations that we might see. Now, there are some important limitations to the data that we're using to make this evaluation of that interconnection between groundwater and surface water. I just wanted to point them out. They're discussed in the report. But we have a lot of gaps, as you can see, between our well points, and so we're projecting or extrapolating between these. And so there's some pretty good distances that we're having to extrapolate. We had planned to install some additional piezometers and some temperature probes in these gap areas to help fill it in. But so far we don't have access to those properties, and frankly, the COVID-19 has made things difficult to be able to work through that process and to gain access to install the equipment. We eventually will install that equipment and begin the monitoring program. It's just that we may not benefit from a full year of monitoring data in time to get the GSP completed. The other limitation that we have is that these wells are completed at different depths. Ideally, we want to be working with shallow piezometers that, you know, in the upper 10 to 20 feet, so that we could look at the groundwater elevation relative to the river stage. But many of these wells could be, you know, 100 feet deep, and the screens in those wells might be, they range anywhere from 20 feet below ground surface to, you know, 50 or more feet. So we have some issues with the fact that these are generally wells that are deeper in the system. And of course, proximity to the river is a real important consideration. And as well as we lack stage data or river elevation data at each of these points. So we're having to infer based on where the water levels are in the wells relative to the river bottom, you know, is the stream gaining or losing in that stretch? Is it connected or not connected? So I'm gonna walk through some of the hydrographs here, and these are some of the more important ones. So just to point out a few of the features that you see here, we've got two plots. They're essentially showing the same water level data for well VWD S7, and that well is up here on the east end of the basin. You can see also we've shown a green line across the top that represents our estimate of where the river bottom or stream bottom is, the Thalwag elevation. We've also in this top hydrograph included the Saugus Water Reclamation Plant discharges. And then the lower graph shows the cumulative departure from mean rainfall. So upward trends in that slope indicate above average rainfall, downward trends indicate below average rainfall for each year. And across the bottom, this scale is the year 2000 to 2020. So the main thing to get out of this as we present it and go through this is that you can see there's a lot of variability in the water levels here seasonally, ups and downs as you would expect just on the basis of annual rainfall. It could also be affected by other wells pumping in the area. During the period between 2005 to 2008, roughly, you could see the groundwater levels were up close to the river channel bed. But then, as you can see, with periods of below average rainfall, those water levels dropped below the elevation of the stream bed or below the Thalwag. But as rainfall started to return to normal and become less negative, we see the water levels were starting to recover in more recent years since the drought ended. We don't see much correlation here with the WRP discharge. We do see a pretty strong correlation though with the rainfall data. Let's move to the next well, which is well NLF G3. That well is right here, just upstream from the confluence with Castaic Creek. So NLF G3. Again, we can see the hydrograph here, the annual fluctuation. We can see in yellow are Castaic reservoir releases, and you can see a pretty strong correlation with the reservoir releases and upticks and pretty strong upticks in the groundwater levels. We see that there were fewer releases during the drought period, and so the water levels began to drop, and they dropped below the elevation of the stream bed. So during the, we can see that the river was probably gaining in the early 2008 to 2011, 2012, and then it started to lose in that period during the peak of the drought. But then when the Castaic releases came back, we see the water levels in that well pop back up. Not much of a correlation with WRP flows, and you can see there is a fair correlation with the rainfall, but seems to be a stronger correlation with the releases as you might expect from Castaic. Next well is well C4, which is here, just downstream of that Castaic Creek confluence with the Santa Clara River. And I'll show that hydrograph. Now, this one's interesting in that you can see how far below the estimated riverbed elevation the groundwater levels are. And I think this illustrates one of the challenges that we have with the data set. We don't have a lot of good control on some of these wells and the elevations of the groundwater levels, elevations of the wellheads that we are using to convert depth to water to elevation. But it does show the correlation in water levels with, again, castaic releases, not much of any correlation at all with WRP flows because they're so constant. And it's difficult to see the correlation with the rainfall trends. Not much of a correlation there either. So I would say that this is a potential data gap. We need to resolve the elevation of the well, in this case, in the riverbed. Next one is NLF B14, which is down here in this cluster, downstream of Castaic. This one, you can see the water level hydrographs are hovering around that estimated river bed elevation, the Thalweg elevation. So there's a pretty strong correlation here between the river and the groundwater elevation. Difficult to say if there's a correlation with WRP flows. Not much of a correlation with rainfall in this particular well. This area happens to be in the vicinity of where the Saugus Formation is discharging back into the alluvium, and I'll show you another map that illustrates that. And that's probably why we see this constant groundwater elevation, even when the precipitation is dropped off. It's fairly stable and fairly constant. And lastly, I want to point out we have a well down here just outside the basin boundary, 27B. That one is an interesting hydrograph that I'll show you. It's got a long record. That's 27B. And this record goes back to, let's see, what year is that? That's 1980. January of 1980 is the earliest data set we have. And you can see that here is this blue line represents the combined discharges of the Saugus and Valencia WRPs. You can see here the green line representing where we estimate the riverbed elevation to be, the bottom of the riverbed. And so water levels that are bouncing around very close to that elevation, we think, represent places where the river is gaining. But then you can see during periods, especially during periods of below average rainfall, those groundwater levels are dropping. This is back in the early 90s. But then they came back when rainfall started coming back. And then a long period of stability, but then in the drought, 2011, you can see that water level really dropping dramatically. Pretty strong correlation with the precip. Since the end of the drought in 2016, the water levels have started to come back up. But you see a lot of fluctuation there. This is in the vicinity where the alluvial aquifer is starting to get thicker. It's in the vicinity of the dry gap area that some people might know about, downstream of Blue Cut, downstream of the county line gauge. So, moving on, I wanted to talk about the gaining and losing reaches and the basis for determining that. We used a combination of those hydrographs that I just showed you for these wells, and also visual observations of what's happening in the river in a few places, and then also results from the groundwater modeling work that we've been doing to help us fill in the gaps where we don't have information. And so we put together 3 maps, as you saw in our report, one for wet conditions, one for normal conditions, and one for dry. And these are inferences based on the information that we have from observed data, for the most part, with some information from the groundwater model to fill in. So here's a map that shows in blue places where we think the river is gaining during wet conditions, and essentially you can see all the way from the east end across the basin until roughly until we get to Potrero Canyon here. The river is gaining, whereby the groundwater levels are above the thalweg, above the river level. There is a stretch here in Reach 5 where it looks like the river may be losing, but it's difficult to confirm that. We have limited information in that area. We do know that this stretch of the river is sitting within a fairly thin layer of alluvium that sits on top of low permeability Pico Formation. So that discharge from the Saugus Formation pretty much ends right here at the beginning of Reach 5. And so from here on, it's the alluvium sitting on that low permeability Pico Formation. And so we've just inferred that the river's losing in that area. But the reality is we have limited information. Going to the normal conditions, that's what this map represents. You can see that we have, during normal conditions, we see that the river is losing or infiltrating into the underlying aquifer here, and then there's hydrographs that indicate or suggest, in the model suggests that the river might be gaining in this section, particularly in the area around the I-5 bridge. And then it loses until we get to just downstream of the Valencia WRP, and where we observe that and believe that the river is starting to gain again, in part because of that recharge. And also because in this area, the alluvium is getting thinner, particularly around Round Mountain. It's causing groundwater to come up to the surface over here around Round Mountain. And then, let's see, I'm going to show you here, we've got the Valencia WRP right here, and the Saugus WRP down is upstream here. So we have the variable gaining and losing reaches. This reach 4, as you see here, is again the reach that seems to be perpetually gaining as a result of the Saugus aquifer, Saugus Formation discharging into the alluvium. All right, now we go to dry conditions. And again, in this case, we see that the river is mostly losing along most of the reach, except for a small area around the I-5 bridge. And we say that that's gaining there because both Tom and John Porcello observed that there was groundwater upwelling into some pools in this area. So there's a unique situation right in this area where we know UTS, or the unarmored three-spined stickleback fish, hangs out. But then for the most part, downstream of that, it's losing until, again, we get into this reach 4, where the Saugus Formation seems to be discharging, appears to be discharging back into the alluvium and then to the river. So that's the picture just based on observed water level information and combining that with visual observation and some groundwater model results. Lastly, I want to talk about the effects of precip, the WRP discharges, and pumping on river flow at the county line. This is important. This is the county line gauge is down here. Let me get to this gauge. County line gauge is down here, just past the basin boundary. This is the gauge that the groundwater model is calibrated to. It's the gauge that downstream basins are using to kind of get a feel for how much water is coming into their downstream basin, the Piru, Fillmore basins. So we've plotted on this graph, you can see the green line and an orange line. These are basically dry season or low flow, non-peak flows in the river based on actual gauge data. We've subtracted out the peak flows because they blow off the scale on those high flow events. And we're really focusing in on those low flows that we see at the county line gauge. We have 2 gauges represented here because they discontinued monitoring here at the county line gauge and went with what's called the Piru gauge. They seem to be have similar responses. So the thing I wanted to point out here with these flows is that you see this increase that's occurred here at the county line and Piru gauge. These bars represent water year precipitation. Not a lot of correlation that you can see with the river flow at that gauge. You go to the next relationship, again, I'm showing those flows at the downstream river gauge, surface water gauges. These blue bars represent the combined discharges from the Saugus and Valencia water reclamation plants, beginning in basically the late 60s on, or early, 63 on to present day. And you can see there does seem to be a correlation between the flows measured at the gauge, the downstream gauge in the river, and those WRP discharges, and frankly, urbanization that has driven that increase in the flow. The importation of state water really has made a big difference in the flow as seen at that gauge. And then lastly, we've plotted the total pumpage for these Saugus and alluvial aquifers in the basin. Basically prior to 1980, these are estimated pumpages based on estimates of pumpage for agricultural uses and municipal and industrial uses. These post 1980 are actual measured pumpage. And based on these data, it's difficult to see a direct correlation with the stream gauge data. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but these data don't really jump out at you that there's a strong correlation between the two. So with that, I'm going to answer any questions. I'm happy to go back to any of the graphs or answer questions you might have.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Can you go 2 slides back to the chart with the discharge?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go 2 slides back to the graph with the numbers related to discharge, please? Yeah. No. Yeah, there we go. How are we seeing correlation between discharge and the stream flow?
Well, I'm simply making an observation that beginning in 1963, when those WRP, those plants were beginning operation, you can see that those discharges steadily increasing, and that happens to correspond with when the river flow measured at the gauges increased.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On these various wells, were they all pumping the same, they have the same motors and how much water were they pumping? Were they pumping almost the same amount of water as each other, or what?
Good question. That points out something I didn't mention, that the water level measurements that we're showing are intended to be static measurements, non-pumping water levels. Of course, that's, again, a limitation in the data. We're not completely certain that they're static, meaning they've been not pumped. But we made an effort to try to only show the static water levels. So regardless of the pump size or how much they've been pumped, that's what we wanted to show.
So the static levels, I mean, the elevation of the water, or I don't understand. I mean,
Yeah,
I understand gallons a minute and acre feet a year and stuff like that, but go ahead. It's the pressure of the water, or?
So the water level as measured in the well, and we converted it to elevation.
Yeah.
Is most of these data points look like they're relatively static levels, except for a few points. These points that you see dropping down here on NLF B14, those may be pumping affected by pumping either in that well or an adjacent well. So what we wanted to try to do is to show what was happening at this location when there's no pumping in that well.
Now, if the pumping was different, how much would it affect that curve?
It could affect it. You could see in this curve if there was heavy pumping for a long period of time that created a pumping and removed water from storage in the aquifer, you'd expect that you could see a depression there because of that pumping. But because we're in the alluvial aquifer, we're assuming that it's unconfined, it's not under pressure.
Yep.
It responds pretty quick. This aquifer responds very quickly.
And Sandra has her hand raised. Her hand raised.
Sandra, go ahead, and others, please raise the hand. It's a little easier to track everybody.
Hey, thank you, Holly. Jeff, I have a couple of questions. First of all, because I got thrown off my computer, I'm now on my iPad. I missed the very first couple of moments of your presentation, and
Okay.
so I'm assuming you are just looking at the WR, because I don't see, and you start at the Saugus WRP. There is another discharge a little further upstream, which is from the perchlorate cleanup, which puts a substantial amount of water into the river. And I'm wondering if that changes any of the data in any way. Also, the far west area where you had as a losing area. I was looking at the map and then the chart that you had that talked about that area at a certain point in time. And it seems to me that until about 10 years ago, there was high agricultural water usage and pumping in that area by the Newhall Ranch. And I'm wondering if that is reflected in this, or if that has anything to do with why that would be considered a losing area, because so much water had been pumped out.
Okay, so two questions there, actually. So the amount of water that's being discharged by those treatment facilities for perchlorate is relatively small compared to the WRP discharges. We did not include it in this analysis, but I think it's just going to be noise in the data set. I don't think we could pick it out, to be honest. Regarding the second question is, agricultural pumping has been important, particularly in the past. Back in the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of pumping that went on, not just by Newhall Land and Farming Company, but others. And over the years, as land has been converted from agricultural pumping to urban areas, then we're seeing that that pumping, the agricultural pumping, has well, as you'd expect, would decrease from what it was back in the 60s. I couldn't say that we did not draw any correlations between any pumping that the Newhall Land and Farming folks did to causing the there. We didn't draw that correlation. In part because I think that area down there is sitting on the Pico Formation, and just isn't, there's nothing under that aquifer that's contributing water to it. So it's gaining and losing depending on the time of year. So I'm not answering your question directly, but I will say this, that you will see later on in future presentations, we are going to talk about the groundwater model, and we do include groundwater pumping, both for ag and for municipal uses in the model. And so we'll have an opportunity to talk about that.
You're right. That doesn't quite answer my question. And so one of my issues has been that, or not issue, but a concern or a question that I have. Is it possible to look at when the perchlorate outfall started to see if it caused any change in the groundwater levels at all?
See, yeah, I think that's a good question. John, do you have, John's on the phone, John Porcello. I'm going to pull back to one of these wells that are back in that area. John, do you recall when it was that or does anyone know when it was that the discharge from those treatment facilities started being pumped into the river? Rick, do you know?
We've got
I can speak to the system that's actually on the Whitaker Burmite site, which I assume that's what you're asking about. They started operating that system in late 2017 and kind of gradually ramped it up over the next year or so. But at this time, from what I understand, they're really only pumping about 300 gallons per minute or so from that system, which is a pretty small rate compared to.
Don, this is Dan Mosnada. I think the question was in regards to the perchlorate treatment facility at Bouquet, right next to Lowe's, that the agency installed and is put in operation. And I was trying to remember when the wells finally came online, or when the facility went into operation. I remember the ribbon cutting. I can't, staff can figure out when it was.
actually get all of them.
All right. Well, yeah. John, about
Dan, I think this is Dirk. This is Dirk, Dan. I believe that went online in late 2009, early 2010, that time frame. The one by Lowe's.
Thank you, Dirk.
Thanks, Derek. But again, the flow from Whitaker is minimal. It's next to nothing. I mean, I shouldn't understate it like that, but it pales in comparison to what's being treated at the perchlorate facility.
Well,
That's very small relative to the WRP flows.
Don't have a well showing that at the very far, it would be just beyond the boundary of where your map is.
Up here?
Well, yeah. And I think that it's had an effect on those wells right over there next to the Saugus WR. However small, I believe it has actually contributed good clean water into our river and aquifers. And I'm looking at your chart, in 2017, it looks like there's a little bit of an uptake.
That happens to be when we had an above normal rainfall year. So we saw an uptick in a bunch of the wells there. Since 2009, you can see the trend here. This is in S7, which is the well just downstream of where you were talking about, shows that decline. It shows a very strong response to the rainfall pattern and the recharge coming in from rainfall in the upper part of the basin.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so Lynn, I see you have your hand raised. We're going to do public comment after questions from the committee, but I'm going to stop off. Tom, did you have a comment? Was that about that?
Yeah, I do have a couple comments related to data gaps. Jeff mentioned them several times in his presentation, and I wanted to mention for the committee that Sigma allows you to have data gaps as long as you identify what they are in your plan and what your plan is to eliminate those data gaps. And you're required to update the groundwater plan every 5 years. And this is especially important for this kind of data gaps because we're not the only one in this situation. Water agencies throughout the state are missing the shallow groundwater wells or shallow piezometers that are really needed to show what's happening here. And people are scrambling to put in wells, but it hasn't really happened yet. So if that makes a difference in what we present to the public.
Thank you, Tom. Kathy, is this another question? I'm sorry, I didn't see when the hand went up, so.
Yes, I have another question.
Great, go ahead.
Actually, I have two questions. The first one is, can you give more detail about the temperature probes that you talked about and how they help with the data gap and where they will be installed? So that's the first question. And then the second question is, in the hydrographs early on, you talked about how there is an apparent correlation between the releases from Castaic. So my question is if at some point in the future we have less of an allocation of surface water through the State Water Project, how are we anticipating that's going to affect the groundwater levels there?
Good questions. All right, so I don't have a map available right now that shows the locations, the planned locations of those temperature probes and piezometers, but we've been working with landowners to try to get approval to implement a work plan with those locations. They're going to be, there's several that are located in the gaps. And let me show the map. That might be the best way. We've got some that are located coincidentally with the existing wells so that we can correlate piezometers data, shallow well data, and temperature with these existing locations. And then we have others that are located in the gap areas. There's basically 40 probes that up to 40 probes that we can install. And the idea being is that the river, for the most part, has warmer temperature year round than the groundwater system. And so we're looking for the signature of the river flow into the aquifer that would, in places where the river is gaining, we would expect groundwater temperatures at those temperature probes, lower temperatures, and compared to places where the river is actually losing and recharging the aquifer, we'd expect warmer temperatures in the aquifer at those locations. So it gives us better information about what's happening with gaining and losing areas in these gap areas, and the piezometers help us, with the shallow piezometers help us correlate with observed levels that are in these deeper alluvial production wells. And regarding your second question, the Castaic releases, I think that what you're describing is a potential condition that we're looking at as far as changes as a result of water availability from the state system and changes in water availability from climate change. And we are required to look at those things as part of this process, and we will look at it. So stay tuned on that question as far as to what extent any changes in Castaic releases might result in changes in groundwater. You could already see from this graph, these yellow bars representing the Castaic releases, they kind of push up the water levels, but then when we didn't have those releases, the water levels drop. So that's a pretty strong indication that those releases are important to at least the groundwater levels in that portion of the basin and downstream.
And that'll specifically be stated in the plan?
Well, we're in the process of formulating what those future conditions might be that we need to investigate. So we'll take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Any other committee members have questions of Jeff at this moment? Okay, then I will go to public comment. And as I stated at the beginning, 3-minute public comment. Kathy Martin will ring a bell at the 30-second mark and then say thank you. Your time is up at 3 minutes and your mic will be muted. Lynn Plambeck, would you like to unmute and go ahead and proceed with your comments?
Yeah, these were actually a lot more questions than comments. So if I got the well numbers right, it seems that you chose all agricultural wells to take data from. And I guess that was because you were trying to get wells that weren't running so you get static water level. And I'll just go through all my questions and then hope you can answer them afterwards. Because all those that I see were agricultural wells, including S7, which I think feeds the lake at Bridgeport. And you said that it may be a losing reach in 5, but not enough data. It seems like there's a lot of wells in reach 5. Why is there not enough data to investigate that? And then I was wondering why you didn't choose any wells that were east of S7, which would, I mean, there's a lot of municipal wells, and some of those wells have really had fluctuations in drought times and between drought and additional pumping, like maybe the Center Point well and some of those wells. And even the upper watershed, of course, is a thin alluvium and really subject to fluctuation with no rainfall. The wells go dry. And I don't understand why there's no discussion of those wells at all, because I think it's important for the health of the river and for the sustainability of the water supply that people understand that we may not have wells in the upper watershed, or that the Center Point well even went dry in the last bad drought. They had to turn it off, or it was reduced pumping now, I can't remember. But we have substantial data on all those wells now. So I'm wondering why you chose not to use them or look at anything in the upper watershed east of the S7.
Okay. All good questions. So let me attempt to respond. So with regard to why we picked agricultural wells, frankly, we had a long history of data sets from those wells. It wasn't that we couldn't use any municipal supply wells, but in this area that we were interested in, they happen to be all irrigation wells. So that's as detailed as that answer gets.
I guess what worries me about that, and I didn't put this in my question, but those wells are, I think S7, we have public data on it, but none of the New Holland and farming wells have any public data. Are you going to make the data available to the public from those wells?
Actually, 5 Point has made those data available to us.
But will you be making it available to the
Oh
public?
yeah, everything that we've presented in here is made available to the public. It's included in our data management system and will be reported, in the GSP. So that's an understanding that we have with 5 Point. They've been very cooperative with us in sharing information. And they've shared this information in the past as well.
Well, yeah, I know you've done a considerable amount of work for them as well, so that would make sense.
Let's see. You talked about reach 5. Go back to that reach. Reach 5. Okay, that's down here, essentially in the vicinity of Potrero Canyon. And we show that to be losing during most periods. As you can see, we actually don't have that many wells. In fact, I don't see any that we've got.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood where reach 5 was. So just, you can ignore that question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
For some reason, I forgot it goes the other way. I was thinking that reach 5 was up by the Saugus, and I guess that's reach 7.
So Jeff, I'm going to have you continue to respond to the questions, but I just want you to respond at this point to address those as best you can.
I'm sorry, Holly. I didn't think I had run out my 3 minutes.
I think, yeah, but you know how public comment works. Sorry, I don't want to get into crosswise. So thanks, Lynn.
Did you want me to respond to the last question? I can easily do that.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, please.
Yeah. So So basically, the question was, why didn't we look at wells east of well at S7? Why did we stop our evaluation here at the Saugus WRP essentially? And the reason being is that the stretch of the river from here on downstream is really where our most sensitive habitat is, that we're concerned about groundwater, surface water interaction, groundwater dependent ecosystems. We're certainly aware east of this, we have basically a perpetual losing situation where the river is constantly infiltrating into the alluvium and then the alluvium into the Saugus. And that, if you can think of it as a bathtub during periods of extra dry, below average rainfall, that alluvium essentially drains out from east to west. And so the wells that are out there to the east of this study area, see that fluctuation. They see the lack of recharge and the draining of that alluvial groundwater away. And so those wells have to be shut down because they start pumping air. They just don't have the water anymore. They don't, that area is ephemeral and constantly losing. And so we chose not to do our study in that part because it wasn't connected into the significant habitat areas, in areas where the river's really gaining and losing.
Okay, were there any other public comments? I don't see it in the hand raised or the chat. So in case we have folks on the phone, Tara, would you kind of quickly unmute everyone and see if anybody else wanted to speak up?
Actually, everyone's on their own mute, so I can't actually unmute everyone. They are already unmuted.
So with that, is there anybody else in the public who wanted to speak? Hearing nothing, I will close the public comment. And then is there any other discussion from the committee? All right.
Mesmerizing.
Thank you, Jeff. It is extraordinarily detailed, and I think we will obviously get into more discussion when we get into the presentations for the next workshop. With that, I'll move on to 3.3. Yes, which Tom is going to present.
Right. Right.
So
Tom, I'll go ahead and
Jeff,
scroll
Tom,
through.
take it away.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
But you can't see me probably. So I think the host has stopped the video. So Tara, if it's okay, if you don't need to see me, but Tara, if you could block me, then I'm willing to be seen. My name is Tom Barnes. I'm with the ESA, Environmental Science Associates, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to share with you the process that we went through to identify potential groundwater dependent ecosystems. And so this study that's available to you is now presented, was prepared for the GSP and for Jeff. We went through a process that I'll describe here briefly and show some graphics of the results. So starting out then, this is just a Santa Clara River watershed. It's a large watershed, and our basin upper basin is a smaller portion of that, and we focused on that. And I'm going to have to ask Jeff for next slide as we walk through this. Thank you. So this alphabet soup title sort of tries to understand what it is that we did, why we did a groundwater dependent ecosystem identification. So for the Santa Clarita Valley GSA, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and for the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, the GSP, we've done a groundwater dependent ecosystem, the GDE identification. The legislation itself, the SGMA legislation, notes that the GSP should include a section on the impacts of groundwater on groundwater dependent ecosystems from the management plan. So it identifies that groundwater dependent ecosystems, GDEs, are important but it doesn't give you an outlay necessarily of a methodology for understanding what those are and where they are and what impacts they are. So the Nature Conservancy stepped in and prepared a really nice guideline for preparing GSPs. And so we took on that stepwise process and implemented it for this particular GSP. So here on this slide, the steps from the TNC guidelines are shown. And we've essentially just done step 1.1. We're really just in the beginning stages of this as per the TNC guidelines, but it does give a substantial step forward, I think, in understanding what resources out there that the groundwater management plan needs to pay attention to. The next steps that the TNC recommends, and again, they're just recommendations, but they are they're compelling and interesting in their relationship to the protection of the resources, is to characterize the condition of the existing GDEs, and then to step 2 is to determine the effects of a groundwater management plan, and then 3 to consider the GDEs when establishing a criteria, sustainable management criteria. So that's part of the integral part of those criteria. Step 4 would be to integrate the GDEs in a monitoring network and identify projects and management actions to maintain or improve GDEs. So that's the whole TNC guidelines. Again, it's not a GSP requirement from DWR necessarily, but it's turned into some good practice. And we are going to present here at step 1.1. So next slide. If you would, thank you. So this is my last text slide. It's dense, and I'll go through it, and I'm going to go through each of the 4 items here, and then I'll show those items graphically with some close-ups of the center of the river. So starting out, the process following the TNC guidelines that's in the report, we did this first step, which was to compile the available vegetation mapping. There is considerable vegetation mapping throughout the state of California that DWR has provided, and that a number of different databases have compiled from different sources. And particularly the natural communities commonly associated with groundwater, the NCCAG database. DWR prepared that. It's similar to the IGDE database, and is comprehensively trying to capture all of the data that is known out there. So that the report shows the different pieces of that. We added to this, we started with this NCCAG database, and so I'll show you what that looks like in graphic form in a second. We added to it the National Wetlands Index, so we've added a little bit more to it, and we wanted to, our intent was to get all the existing information we could. So that's the first KNZ is what we're calling it. It's a Google Earth map that I will show you. The second map that I'll show you, KMZ2, goes to the next step where we have reviewed the initial data of the database data from aerial photography, from recent aerial photography, and tried to understand what the conditions are now compared to the data. Try to see how good the data was with aerial photography, and we did that overview of the entire basin, and that included, filling in some gaps. There were some gaps where the data wasn't there in segments of the river, largely associated with sort of barren river wash. Once we did that with the aerial photography overview, we got to this, we needed to field verify what we could. We couldn't field verify the entire basin. So we chose areas that had a combination of habitat types to see if indeed the data that we were getting correlated well with a field biologist's reflection on the ground. So we did that in multiple areas with different habitat types. We also then looked at areas with vegetation type or hydrology that was unclear, that we were not certain of based on the aerial imagery. We couldn't tell what kind of trees they were, for instance, and that would sort of indicate what what the relationship to groundwater might be. So we went and did a field verification. And in that process, we sort of combined vegetation types to simplify a little bit the coloring and identify riparian types and upland scrub types of vegetation. So that's the second map I'll show you, and I'll walk through this again. The third map then is a refined polygon map where we removed, based on the TNC guidelines, removed upland habitats, the Barren River Wash and the River Stygian sage scrub or habitat that's out there, and the scale broom habitat. We also removed man-made features like golf course ponds, and the Castaic Lake shoreline, for instance, that came up in the mapping. Finally, in the KMZ4, we've basically compiled all of the vegetation types and tried to put them into a classification that fit with the Manual of California Vegetation, the most recent edition, to try to get it consistent with what CDFW likes to see, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, in terms of what sorts of habitats those are. So let me now, next slide, walk through each one of those. If I were to show you the whole watershed, we wouldn't be able to see the colors. And so what I provided in this presentation is a focused piece of the whole KMZ, but the KMZ is available in all of the reaches and the canyons and everywhere in the entire watershed. Obviously, what we're seeing here is that the vegetation mapping associated with wetlands and river corridors are indeed confined to these drainages, two corridors focused on surface water runoff areas. This initial data set here shows is a compilation of all of the available data that we got, as well as some of the gaps that we filled in here is included in this map as well. That showed some barren river wash, for instance, in certain areas. So you can see there's a lot of different types. It's pretty detailed mapping. We were really happy to have to see this when we saw how much data there really was and how precise it seemed to be. Next graph, next slide. So we then field verified and sort of combined categories of habitat types of dominant types, and that's why the colors have turned into just a few colors here showing on this map. The green are different habitat types that are associated with riparian, which would show an indication of some sort of consistent water source. And then the pink and the yellow are habitats that are common in areas that don't have consistent water sources and are more upland scrub type of vegetation types. And this was the map that it's very similar in geographic extent to the first, to KMZ1, and just make sure that we understand what types of habitats are really out there in these drainages. And so next slide. And then this slide shows really the only reduction that we did in vegetation types, and that was to remove upland habitats and man-made features. So we've removed the scale broom habitat and the River Stygian's scrub habitat, but we've kept, if you notice in San Francisco Creek there, there's still some riparian at the edges, and some willows and some hardwood, and potentially, and then again in the Saugus WRP areas to the east on this map, there is some hardwood and riparian habitat there, even though there's a lot of dry wash as well. But we've kept it in this KMZ. So the reason we kept it was because our whole assessment here, I think, is to try to understand, try to let the vegetation tell us what's happening. I think that's maybe the best way to put it. So if we can find vegetation that is known to be perennially needing moisture, that's going to probably tell us where groundwater dependent ecosystems may occur. But it won't tell us for certain. It may very well be urban runoff. It may well be the discharges that you were discussing just now in various places that happen periodically and or consistently since a certain time. We know that the WRPs, the Saugus and Valencia have been discharging for 30, 40 years. Surface water, and the interaction between that surface water and the groundwater is very complex, as Jeff was just walking through. We could take the next cut at this to reduce, to refine it with a depth to groundwater assessment, and that is the next cut that the TNC guideline suggests. Where are areas that are greater than 30 feet in depth? But we haven't done that. And so our report is a report on potential GDEs, not necessarily actual GDEs, because it's all valuable habitat, and we didn't want to eliminate any of it from a management monitoring perspective. So we feel that it's conservative. Next slide. So this next slide is simply to convert that same geographic extent into a classification that the state DFW will really be able to digest and understand. So that's just the riparian mixed hardwood designation. And you can see that it starts here at I-5 or really up above Saugus, and the question is, are those GDEs or are they being fed by surface water is still a question. And then the I-5 comes around, and we've captured, even up Castaic Creek, we've captured quite a bit of habitat that does exist, willows and hardwoods, cottonwoods. And the question of where those plant communities are getting their moisture remains uncertain, remains unclear because of the amount of surface water available. So we, maybe the next slide. Well, the next slide is the whole basin, showing how it's hard to see it at this scale, which is why I showed the close-ups. We have the KMZs available as well with this report, so you can dial in and what for everybody's purpose, it's a Google Earth map where you can go in any location and find these areas. On this map, the green is the riparian and the orange is oak woodland. And we kept the oak woodland in there rather than taking it out because their root depths can be so deep. And we wanted to maybe look at depth to groundwater in those areas before taking them out of the list. But again, they're potentially there now, something to look at in the future. And then my final slide, I believe, is a next steps slide that sort of continues to try to understand how to get from potential GDE to actual GDE. And we may not ever get there in terms of cutting pieces in the river segment going downstream, because we have surface water and then a little underflow and then certain more upwelling and that sort of thing. It's all valuable habitat, I think is the underlying concern. And so we want to refine them, the GDEs, based on depth to groundwater, and we'll do that with modeling and with monitoring data moving forward. We'd also like to continue studying and gaining and losing segments. Jeff, that was a great presentation, lots of good technical stuff there. How could we do better? What are the questions remaining? How can we answer those questions? I think we'll still be thinking about that. And then certainly with the management plan and the groundwater depth or groundwater extraction and analysis that needs to happen, we'll need to determine what impacts to these groundwater dependent ecosystems really might be. So it does come down to the work that Jeff is doing here on with wells in proximity to the fallweg of these streams, and then with a certain root depth identification to continue our analysis. So that concludes my presentation. Appreciate it. Open for questions.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Tom. And so I will take it now to the committee for questions. And again, preference is the raise hands. And so Kathy, I will start with you.
Thank you. So I have 3 questions. One is, I'm not familiar with your firm or your company, so if you could share with us the backgrounds of the people who worked on this report and contributed to it, that would be great. My second question is, how will the work that is done to address steps 2 through 5 be shared with us and put into the plan? And then my third question is, can you talk about why step 1.2 was not covered in the report?
Great. Yes. So I'm sorry that I just jumped in there and didn't really give a background of ESA, Environmental Science Associates, my firm. And I also neglected to say that May Lau is on the call as well. And May is our lead biologist who is the primary author of the report in front of you. So May can chime in too if that's appropriate. But ESA is an environmental consulting firm. We focus exclusively on environmental compliance. We do CEQA and NEPA work, and we are scientists, biologists, hydrologists, cultural resources experts, air quality noise experts, that type of a firm, science-based, but planning focused. So, you know, I personally have been working for the LA County Sanitation Districts as a consultant for many years, evaluating their potential recycled water contributions, or their potential to use recycled water and reduce flows into the river. And so that over all these years have been a focus for me, and I've learned a lot about the surface water as a result. A little different focus than this, the questions than the questions to be answered for this purpose. But we've gone for years trying to understand how to best manage the river system through their eyes, LA County Sanitation District. May Lau is our principal biologist, and you know, who with working for all water agencies throughout Southern California. I don't know if we need to go through the credentials, May's credentials, but we certainly can talk about you know, CVs if we'd like. Let me get to question 2. How will step 2 and 5 be covered? And I you know, the requirement to step through all of the TNC process is not necessarily a DWR requirement for the GSP. And I do think that we will be evaluating how to integrate these as a best practice concept and make sure that we incorporate the intent of these steps. As I said, our next step is to try to determine the potential effects that the groundwater management plans may have on GDEs. That really is our next step. And we'll be looking at groundwater depths, et cetera. And that will sort of tie in to our underlying issue, I think, with the whole team is that I don't think there's an argument from anybody that these GDEs or this habitat in these river corridors, whether they're surface water fed or groundwater fed, are valuable resources. And so managing the river is something that is going to have to be a part of the management plan, including a GSP. Third question: why is 1.2 not done? And there's a couple reasons for that. One, because it's a very large area to look at every single corridor and every single piece from a quality perspective, from a condition perspective. Condition is somewhat subjective. Could be applied, a scale could be applied to it. We certainly could identify areas of Arundo that would help with that. But our bottom line here is that when we see riparian-based, riparian-type vegetation, we recognize it as being valuable inherently. And so the condition of it is a next step about how to handle that. But even in poor condition, we're going to be wanting to manage it.
Sandra.
Thank you. I had a question looking at your one of your maps. I thought that there were there was quite a bit of mixed hardwoods and coast live oaks at Bouquet, and I was surprised to not see that. Ah, this map, I see it now. A little bit better. Okay. The other one is, I would really like to see the type of data that you have also looking at the areas in the south, on the the southern part of the South Fork area, like Bouquet and Bouquet, not, excuse me, not Bouquet, Placerita, Newhall, Ellesmere Creek, and Sand Canyon Creek. And also, I'd like to see information on, more information on the East End, just like Lynn had mentioned. I think that would be important. You may not see as much riparian habitat there, but an earlier comment in an earlier presentation was that deep percolation does occur on the eastern edge. And I think that's important that we evaluate that area and have data.
And so indeed, Sandra, our report includes the entire basin. And I've just in my presentation had this little lens to focus in to show the process. But the KMZ files that will be accessible, that are accessible, have the entire basin. So they do indeed go all the way out to the eastern edge. And yes, there is a small little hardwood riparian area at the very edge of the basin in the main channel. And then we captured a lot of coast live oak pieces in the south as well. Yeah, there you go. In the southern part of the basin there, in those canyons and areas, we've included those. Now, we're not sure if those are reaching groundwater or not, but we have still kept them here because of the type of vegetation they are. They're telling us something, and they could have the potential for deep roots in those canyons. So we've kept them there, and they may not be associated with alluvial aquifer, and it may not have any effect from a pumping scenario, perhaps, but they might have some seepage that's coming from the ground that we don't want to underestimate.
But in this particular slide, I don't see the coast live oak or mixed hardwood up Bouquet in this slide. That's what I was talking.
Yeah. So and I don't have the rest of the data because I had to cut it off before Bouquet on the east side. But we can very easily show that, and that really is reflective of both the existing data and our field verified assessments and aerial photograph assessments too. So it should be comprehensive. And as we review this, comments to the otherwise are helpful. But I think that's that this map here, even though you can't really tell Bouquet very well, perhaps if we zoomed in, we could see some pieces in there, and maybe that's a response. But we can look into that.
This is May. I can respond to that. Yeah, I think it might just be due to the scale of this particular graphic that we're showing now. But Bouquet Creek, we do have it mapped as Fremont Cottonwood Forest, which actually everything that we're showing here in the green that's labeled riparian mixed hardwood is essentially Fremont Cottonwood riparian forest, which does include some willow species as well, but the predominant community is dominated by Fremont Cottonwood. And then what you're seeing in the darker green, the riparian mixed scrub, those were essentially mule fat thickets that would pop up along some of those drainages.
Something must be wrong with my with my views, both on my computer and my iPad, I really am not seeing any dark green. I am seeing primarily light green and a little bit of Coast Live Oak. I'm not seeing all the rest of the stuff you keep talking about. And I know
that goes to scale, and when you zoom in, they show up. So we chose to do the presentation on just the centerpiece because it provides a good assessment there. I mean, a good description of the process, but we can get other lenses in other parts of the basin to show where these a riparian mixed scrub shows up. You can't. I agree. You can't see it in this scale.
that's why I was asking, because I could not see those.
Yeah. I apologize for that. They didn't know quite how to present it, but we can interact. It's an interactive map, and if I had interactive capability, we could go in there now, and we didn't do that for this presentation, but perhaps we should in the future.
Is that interactive? What is the plan for presenting this in the technical reports then? I think the difference between the 1 and the 2, whatever you can start to see kind of the subtleties and the dominant, but how does that get communicated in your technical report or in the chapter on this ultimately?
Well, I tried to summarize how that gets translated.
Will it have the level of detail, I guess, that Sandra's asking about? Is that going to be more evident because you're not as restricted by scale and presentation? I guess that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, no, I think what we've experienced today is that our presentation was focused visually on one segment, but the study is the entire basin. So yeah, you go anywhere on the interactive map and you will get very detailed polygons of existing habitat that largely has been field truthed.
And then can you go back to that sort of that last, I think it was the last slide of next steps. Yeah. So you went through that pretty fast. So I just, I guess when you were just talking about with Sandra about some of the areas where we don't know if it is because it's connected to a groundwater or what's happening there. I mean, is that part of this refining the GDEs, or how do we figure that out? And is that something that like our plan would say we're going to figure that out, or that, because I don't imagine that's possible in the course of building the plan, or can you just speak to that a little bit?
Well, we're in the early stages, Holly, and of trying to understand it, and it's complicated in terms of this surface water groundwater interaction, and we don't want to be dismissive of anything. So we tried to get the biggest capture that we could to start with, and then if by the time the GSP is prepared, we haven't really been comfortable with less. We have, we just saw the groundwater fluctuations over a long period of time. It's a lot. So are we going to just clip a 30-foot groundwater depth onto somewhere and then say, oh, it's not a GDE? Well, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to probably move forward with just saying it's still potential and we're going to look at it. And then it'll be part of a monitoring program. I think these potential areas are largely going to be probably the footprint that was going to be included in a monitoring program.
Okay. Helpful. I am flipping through looking for any other raised hands. I do not see any. So I'll go to public comment. If there are any members of the public who would like to speak, if you could unmute and identify yourself.
Lynn Planbeck.
Go ahead, Lynn. I won't repeat the procedure since we did this once.
Okay, well, I really appreciate that you are looking at oak woodlands, because I think statewide it's been recognized that pumping really can affect woodlands due to the water going below the vadose zone. And I'm wondering, therefore, if you included our Valley Oak savanna, because we had a really severe die-off of oaks in the last drought, where we had a big drop in our water table. And also I wanted to, I wanted to just make sure, I'm sure you know this, but there were several EIRs that were done for projects along the river in the last 2 decades, probably around 2000. There started to be a really lot of them, and a really big natural river management plan. All of those identified groundwater related species and riparian species. And I'm wondering if you are looking at any of the historical areas, because there was a lot of wetlands in there that were destroyed by the development, particularly the ones up San Francisco Creek. And I just also wanted to ask, because I didn't see from the map that had the colors, whether you're including the South Fork, because there's a lot of really substantial habitat in the South Fork of the Santa Clara River as well. There's a lot of species that are dependent on the river, for instance, aurora toads that also depend on the uplands. So I didn't quite understand, maybe you said you were eliminating them and then you put them back in or something. But as for groundwater dependent ecosystems, certainly you would want to include all the ecosystems that have amphibians that are dependent on the groundwater. I would think that would be necessary.
Great. Thank you, Lynn, for your comments. Tom, do you want to speak to that as much as you can at this point? And obviously we'll take it as public comment, but you want to give us some, I think there's probably some things there that you can address.
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Lynn. Valley Oak Savanna, I believe that's captured in our Coast Live Oak. May, are you there? I'm not sure if we've captured all of the oak trees in our capture.
The Valley Oak woodland areas were verified in the field to be in upland areas, so that's not necessarily captured in the Coast Live Oak community that was mapped.
Okay, so those are not in our capture at this point in terms of potential GDEs. The next comment was about old river assessments and wetlands and what may have existed in the past. And I guess my response to that is using the TNC guidance and understanding that we are looking at existing conditions as moving forward. That no, we're not including anything in the past that might have occurred that isn't there now. In this particular watershed, the habitat focused on these drainages kind of limits some of that. Those drainages are all going to be, as I said, valuable and to be managed correctly. So I guess the answer to the previous data is that we compiled all the data that we could get from databases that have done that for habitat that's existing now. I'll move on to the South Fork. Yes, the South Fork is included in this analysis. And so we start with existing data, we look at what those plant communities are, and we remove or clip them out if they're upland. And if they're not, we leave them in. Last question, ecosystems. You mentioned arroyo toad. Absolutely. The ecosystems and the sensitive species that utilize any type of riparian or groundwater dependent ecosystem is one of the principal reasons why they're so valuable. And so yes, if there is a groundwater dependent ecosystem that could support the toad, then, and that toad happens to go and use the upland as well, the upland is recognized as being there, but we're not as a groundwater manager, we're not in a protective a stance for upland, but recognizing that we need to provide the water source to an existing ecosystem that's supported by it.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other public comments at this time on this item? All right, and then final discussion from the committee. Sandra, I see you have your hand raised. And you are muted.
I'm sorry. Lynn brought up a very interesting question about the Valley Oak Savanna. And I'd like you to identify, first of all, what you meant by upland, because in my opinion, the Valley Oaks are on the valley floor, along with many of the coast live oaks, and exactly the same thing happened with coast live oaks as was happening with Valley Oaks just a few years ago, that we had a big die-off. And I noticed it in my community here in Placerita Canyon. And I know you're looking at what is today, but it might behoove you to look at what might have caused something like that. How much did the water table drop that it affected, 200-year-old to 300-year-old oak trees to die? Thank you. And could you?
I think it's I think that's an excellent comment, Sandra, and I think we'll go back and look at that. There are, characterizations for different communities about the perennial access to water that we've used. But I think we should take a good look at Savannah Oak. I don't know that there is, I think we should err on being too broad, quite frankly. So if we could monitor oaks and groundwater levels in certain areas, I see it as part of a greater ecosystem management. But I also want to make sure that it's clear that as a groundwater plan, we need to focus on groundwater dependent ecosystems. And so, I think the question would be, how do these client communities get their water? And if there's a potential for them to get water from a groundwater zone, then yes, we should include them. So I think it's an excellent point. We'll look at it carefully.
Yes, it's the Valley Oak and the Coast Live Oak, and they tend to be near creeks.
And we've included the Coast Live Oak, so we've had those, but we've made a determination to cut out the Valley Oak, and we'll go investigate that a little closer.
Thank you. Oh, and what is an upland?
Well, an upland, May, do you want to take this? I mean, an upland is a habitat classification that is, plants not associated with a perennial groundwater source.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of the upper floodplain scrub habitat, that's, Riversidian alluvial fan sage scrub, that's known to rely on, non-perennial water sources, for example. That's considered, that was removed as part of the upland habitat because it's not associated with groundwater. It's not a groundwater dependent type of natural vegetation community. So that was one of the steps we took in refining, looking at literature, scientific literature that substantiated that the different types of upland communities that we felt there was good justification for in terms of understanding that particular habitat type, and whether or not it also looking at plant root depth as well, which is another resource that's identified in the TNC guidance in terms of determining the connection of that particular plant or community to groundwater.
So can I clarify in my own mind something?
Yes, go ahead, Sandra.
It has nothing to do with elevation. So if you are, let's say, in Whitney Canyon, where there are several little seeps and streamlets that go into the creek, anything around that area would not be considered an upland, even though it's dripping down the mountain, or
No, that's not about
because
elevation.
that is,
It's not about elevation. It's about the word upland means away from water. So if there's water, it's not upland. So we definitely wanted to capture seepage ecosystems as being dependent on groundwater because they're dependent on that seepage.
thank you, that clarified it.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, appreciate it.
So Tara, we'll go to 3.4 where we get the fun step of figuring out how to present this in a public workshop on August 5th. See your proposal, and I think we had a good debrief of the first one, so I think this should be really tailored to what the presentation is, unless there's something unique about the format that's changing. So Tara, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
All right, so there's really not anything different in terms of the format. We're keeping the presentation. You had one presentation, questions, another presentation. So following that format again, and then we've got the this time there were really only two kind of breakout ideas. So we've done two different handouts that you guys have had for a while. I will show those to you again. We also have the two video scripts. These ones that I'll show today have been modified, including some of the feedback from committee members who've submitted ahead of time. In addition to that, we've made some changes to the website to make that a little bit easier to find, locate, and access. So we'll look at that, and then some questions there. And then I wanted to sort of highlight where we are with the FAQs, so you can see that we've actually made some progress there, and we've kind of grouped the questions together. So we'll, and then once those get approved internally, we'll post them, and then you guys can make comments. We'll tweak as needed. But I wanted to show you the format of how they've kind of presented. So to start, let's get into the website, because I think that's the easiest place to find most of this. So on the homepage, we've updated it to have the latest workshop information just right there, rather than having to know where to go. We've also encouraged people to learn more, and we've also sent out information about this already through social media, and we'll be sending it out through press release as well. So once you get here, we've also updated, we've changed this information so it no longer says outreach, it says public input. We're holding all the public workshop information there with feedback forms, which do not expire. They just continue on. We ask new questions every time. They never expire. So if somebody wants to come back and answer a question about something specific, it's there. But we also have some questions that we're going to be asking each time. So kind of going through this, we've now added an area where you can find out if you're within the basin borders. We've moved that from the outreach section to be more a part of the plan section so that you can figure out if this impacts you. We've also added the technical memorandums and presentations to the plan itself, so you can start to see that sort of develop. And then we have, again, the learn more information and upcoming workshops and providing your input, which takes you directly to the input form so that you have immediate access to whatever the latest input form is. So going back to public workshops, the current public workshop lives here at the moment. One of the things that we will be switching in terms of the public workshop is we'll be adding a component, interactive component at the very beginning. That will be it'll be a fun poll that's interactive that people can start to play on their own computer. We'll invite people to go to the website at the very beginning rather than just telling them about the resource at the end. And then this poll is how many 8-ounce glasses can be filled with an acre-foot of water. So I'm gonna, because I know the answer, guess that. And then you'll see how many people have guessed kind of and where they're at. So it's just like a fun little thing that doesn't really impact anything, but kind of warms the audience up and gets them to the resource page right away. We'll continue to have this layout as you've seen previously. This is where the different drafts currently live just in this moment, so that you can see how we're setting this up a second time with the new questions. So let's get into the handouts. We're to kind of go over the connection between groundwater and surface water. We've included a basin map, which also includes the flow of the hydrology, which we've talked about before, and and it talks about how surface water moves. Then we've talked about barriers to groundwater groundwater recharge by surface water. So really getting into what keeps recharge from happening. And then going into a little bit, this is like a little brief of the technical memo at the highest level. So what we're doing, what the relationship is, how you're studying it, and what conclusions were made according to the technical memo. I'm not expecting us to all read it right now. You're welcome to continue to provide me input until Friday. So take your time with it if you would like to go over it a second time or third time or 8th time and provide me your feedback. If you have any feedback now, I'm happy to accept that. From the committee first, and then we can get into public.
Any comments from the committee to begin?
This is Sarah. I do have a very quick comment that I should have said earlier but I finally got my computer working. You have all these wonderful pictures of areas showing riparian areas, but you have them, with coordinates. Is it possible to also have them relabeled, view of X Canyon at so-and-so, so that people have, they don't have to get their GPS out, see where this is?
So there are no actual coordinates on the photos. Those are stock image overlays because we don't have specific photos at this moment in time from staff of the very specific area. We know that this is the Santa Clara River because we're able to find that very specifically. So it's the right information and it's the right location, but I don't have access to like very specific locations. I could
Sample. I'm looking at, say, ID number 24, coordinates, and it gives me 2 coordinates.
Where is that on any
It's 185.
One.
And it talks about
handout, or are you talking about something else?
Yes, I'm all the way back in the last.
I think she's back in the technical memo somewhere.
Oh, okay.
That would
okay. Let's
name those areas.
Okay, so you're back in the technical memo and we are in the handouts.
I know.
Okay.
If we could
So-
know.
Note to Jeff, if you
Thank
can add captions. Or,
Thank you.
yeah.
I was waiting for you to finish speaking. And I know I should have mentioned it earlier. Sorry.
Totally fine.
Got it. Thank you. Were there other committee members who want to make comments at this time? And I definitely, if you've not submitted comments or really reviewed in great detail, I encourage everyone to do that. I think, the comments we had for the first one was really helpful in improving that workshop. Kathy, go ahead.
So I have a question about the term workshops, because that, unless I'm not remembering correctly from the last public workshop, there wasn't really, what's the term I'm trying to explain? What's the part where we're explaining these two components? The breakouts? Is that what we were saying, the breakouts? I don't remember having that component at the end of the last one, so I'm not sure why we're calling them breakout sessions, because really all we did was just tell people to go look and read these and watch the video and then answer the questions, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
So we did not have breakout sessions. It's still a workshop because it encourages interaction. And
I'm sorry, no, I get that. The workshop's the right term. Breakout is the term that I was confused over.
we're not doing breakout sessions anymore.
Okay.
And we're not calling it a breakout session.
Okay.
I'm just calling it areas of interest.
Okay, no, that's fine. But my only recommendation would be, and I think I mentioned it last time, is at the beginning of the workshop, if we could tell people or give them the heads up that there are these additional resources that we would like for them to look at, and to please answer the questions, because I think from last time we only got 2 responses, so it'd be nice to try to increase that.
And again, that's why we're doing now, I don't know if you saw when I was back into this area, but we're actually doing a poll that we're encouraging people to participate on as people are coming in and waiting.
Yeah, I don't understand that piece.
So when you walk in, rather than starting with the presentation or anything, we're going to say, we'd love for you to go onto our website, click the link in the chat window, and fill out this poll just to kind of break the ice. So they'll go right to the resource page. And if you notice on this page, we also have additional resources for you to engage with.
Good.
So it creates that moment of a little bit of fun prior to sitting for 2 hours in a presentation, and B, creates a little bit more interaction with the website regardless of whether or not they want like the resource right now, and reminds them where it is.
Okay, thank you. You made the connection for me now. Thanks.
No problem. Are there any other questions or comments, thoughts? Holly, you're muted.
Again, any other questions from the committee? I would ask everybody to spend another couple minutes looking at these handouts for any comments that and the website, which looks, it just keeps getting better. So thank you for all of the work on that, in my opinion, at least. Any other comments from the committee at this time? Then I will go to public comment. And again, Lynn, I'm not going to go through the procedure since I think you're familiar, the 3 minutes, and I will hand it to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, I just wanted to comment generally on the website. It's not about the presentation, which I thought was really good. But, so I don't know who's in charge of updating the website, but I was looking for this meeting yesterday and it said you were meeting at the Water District, which has since been changed. But the website needs to be updated. For instance, it says most recent agenda and it comes up for January 20th. So, and when meetings are virtual, they shouldn't say that they're going to be meeting at the water agency. So I just wanted someone to suggest that someone give the website a quick once over and look for inconsistencies like that. And I don't know who's in charge of it, but particularly when you have a workshop coming up, I don't think you want to have your last meeting look like it was January 20th or that you're doing in-house meetings anywhere.
Agreed.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Maybe Kathy Martin and Tara, you can do a little scrub to look for that. I know it's a lot to keep on top of, but I think it's a very, very, very valid point.
Agreed.
Any other members of the public that would like to make public comment? Hearing none. I'll close. Any other final discussion? Last call for a final discussion from the committee. And I'm certain you all have that date firm on your calendar. With that, that sort of concludes the pieces on that. Specifically on the things for the workshop and the technical things. So we'll go to item 3.5, which is the discussion of releases from the Bouquet Reservoir. And Rick Vergoots is going to do that, I believe.
Certainly. Hi, Holly. Hello, everybody. I can introduce this item, and I know that Mr. Herring would like to say a few words about it. So there's a brief staff report in the package today that talks a little bit about the history of the reservoir and the releases of water from the reservoir. And in recent years, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power has sought a water rights application to continue to carry on those releases, but via a water rights application. Prior to this, they were releasing the water through an agreement they had with the predecessor to United Water Conservation District. And so this application is an administrative step to formalize the releases through a water right. However, the staff report also mentions that despite this water right applications, there are some limitations on how much water can be released due to limitations placed on LADWP from other entities, such as related to potential for flooding and habitat issues. And this issue was raised at the GSA board just as an information item last year. We did review the nature of the water rights application at that time and provided a summary to the board. And we did consider it to be a positive development, the memorialization of that release through a water right. But Mr. Herring has also been heavily involved in this, in many ways more so than us, and he's asked that the committee discuss this, and he's prepared a presentation. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Herring, if that's okay with you, Holly.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, then
Yes.
can I share a screen here?
Terry, can you make
And
sure that Roger can share a screen? There you go.
we're up. Okay, I'll run through it fairly quickly, and then we'll take some questions, and I'll go from there. This is a picture of Bouquet Reservoir. It was created in 1932 by a dam constructed by Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, LADWP. It hosts 36,000 acre feet of water. The dam blocks 13 square miles of Bouquet Canyon watershed, and its sole intended use is to store water from the Owens Valley brought to Los Angeles via the LA Aqueduct. The reservoir, the dam, and 8 miles of Bouquet Canyon downstream from the dam lie in the National Forest and adjacent. I got to move my little toolbar here so I can see. The Angeles National Forest and adjacent to the Bouquet Canyon Road. Sorry, got ahead of myself there. And by contract, United Water Conservation District, UWCD, dated in 1932 and then amended again in 1978, LADWP agreed to release into Bouquet Creek 2,100 acre feet of water annually. And that 2,100 acre feet of water represents the 40-year average of rainfall amount, which, absent the dam, would have flown into Bouquet Creek and recharged the groundwater gravels in Bouquet Canyon and the east and the Santa Clara River Valley East subbasin. And we can go to the next one. And why can't we go to the next one? Did someone click? Let me, okay. So we've got a problem. The Bouquet Canyon well owners and the Santa Clara River Valley East Subbasin have a problem. Because since 2005, substantially less than the contracted amount of water has been released from Bouquet Reservoir into Bouquet Creek. And as a consequence, fire protection is compromised, well water levels have gone down or dried up, water quality is diminished, and there is a residential community of about 100 people forced to truck in water almost daily at their own expense. So let me go further. Why isn't this doing it? So, and the problem is compounded by Department of Water and Power's recent request to appropriate 1,830 acre-feet of water annually from Bouquet Creek. And this is the public notice that occurred in the Signal. It occurred back in January in 2019, and public protests were allowed up until March 25th of 2019. They want to appropriate 1,830 acre-feet of water per year, and it's from October 1st to March 31st on every year, and it's to preserve and protect the wildlife preservation and enhancement in the creek area. So can there be a successful solution to this problem? I mean, we've got a problem. They haven't been releasing water. They haven't done it on a formal basis or a permit basis until just now. They're requesting to do it on a permit basis, which is gonna just perpetuate the reduced releases. And the answer is yes, there can be a successful solution. And from a protester's standpoint, I would be willing to let them appropriate water from Bouquet Reservoir if they agree to purchase all the past and future appropriated water at fair market value for untreated water. Now, what that fair market value is, and this is untreated water, this is free rainwater. This is not anything they had to build an aqueduct for to transport water down. This is water and snow melt that occurred that by contract they agreed to pass on through and not retain. So Tom, are you there, or maybe Jeff, can you tell me what a fair market value for a acre foot of untreated water might be for LADWP or Santa Clarita Water at today's rate? Is Jeff there?
I really can't answer that. I would think someone from the agency might have a feel for that based on.
I don't know if Steve Cole is here. Rick Fergutz, maybe.
This is Dirk Marks. The value of water can vary widely depending on hydrologic conditions and also where the water is located. LADWP if they had to replace, well, this water would probably offset water that they otherwise would have to buy from their wholesaler, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And my understanding is that that cost is in excess of $1,000 an acre foot. That's maybe one end of the range. The other end of the range, say in the San Joaquin Valley, during a wet year, water districts are purchasing water for $100, $200, probably closer to $200 an acre foot. So hopefully that provides a range that would help frame the discussion on the value of water.
Yeah, it does. And what I did, and I looked at the Metropolitan Water District, which sells untreated water to LADWP, and they have 2-year contracts or budgets that they propose. And the most recent one was the 2018, I think, and it was in the $750 to $850 an acre foot that LADWP might pay for that. I went up.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about treated water, but that's great.
That would be untreated water. That's from the Colorado River. And then I went up to, I looked at the Santa Clara Water District, which is up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And for non-agriculture water, for residential water, they're buying, and they're a water wholesaler. They have it broken down into different districts, but their high range is 1,300 to 1,400 a square foot. And then a few months ago, I asked somebody who really is in a position to know, and without saying his name, I will say that he very definitely is in a position to know. And he came up with the 1,000 acre foot, dollars per acre foot, if you could find it at that. So the amount of water that's already been diverted and stored by DWP from 2005 to 2019 is 11,368 acre feet. And Jeff gave me that. They keep their records very precise and very good. And Jeff gave me those figures from which I computed. The reservoir, which holds 36,000 feet, already is holding in reserve 11,360 acre feet. That's rainwater. So the amount of water that they want to divert on an annual basis is 1,830 acre feet. 1,830 acre feet annually. So if we convert water to money, we get 11,360 acre feet of water at $1,000 an acre foot. That's $11,360. That's a one-time amount. And then on an annual basis, if they want to divert 1,830 acre feet of water at $1,000 acre foot, that's $1,830,000 annually. Now, what could you do with that kind of money? How could that benefit the entities within the Santa Clara River Valley East subbasin? Well, for one thing, it could fund a pipeline that would bring treated or untreated water up Bouquet Canyon to those well owners that are either trucking water or are doing without water or had to close up business because they had no water. Their wells went dry. They couldn't support their business. It could fund water conservation and environmental projects within the subbasin. I think in the last workshop, there was somebody that said, why aren't we landscaping some of these areas within the subbasin? And we have some endangered species. We have some invasive species. We have some endangered fish and I guess a toad that's in there. There have been efforts to try and recover those or restore those where they've been removed from habitats, particularly in Bouquet Canyon. And it could be used to purchase untreated water to replenish the water that we are not getting for the aquifer in the Saugus Aquifer. So the outcome that I would like from today, and really I'd like the advisory committee just to discuss this problem. I'd like to hear any public comments, but really to cut to the short of it, I'd like the Santa Clarita Water Company management and legal staff to consider this particular solution and take a position on whether they want to support this position to purchase the water or not. And what happens is this: there are three people that protested, or three entities that protested the application. One is California Department of Fish and Game. One is myself and my wife, who as a small well owner, and another is another medium well owner whose well was used predominantly for agriculture purposes, and 5 years ago it went down to the level where it could no longer support his business, and he basically put him out of business. And I'd like, and I've been dealing with Department of Water Resources on how this protest gets resolved. And I said, do you go before a hearing or what happens? And they said, basically, we want you to negotiate with Department of Water and Power and see if you can't resolve this issue. So we have taken the first step to negotiate with them. We had a meeting down Department of Fish and Game said they want to do their own workout for this. So the two well owners in Bouquet Canyon, we met down in LADWP in a conference room with one of their legal staff and the head of their aqueduct and a couple of the engineers, and we staked out our position, and they basically said that they really aren't at a level of management that they are in a position to negotiate. So they sent a letter to Department of Water Resources and said that their position was basically at this point non-negotiable. They want to have the water appropriated despite the protest. And we said we are more than willing to discuss and negotiate at appropriate level with Department of Water and Power. The solutions that we involved, either they somehow provide us with the water, which they've been unable or to do for the past 15 years, or instead of giving them the free water through this permit, sell it to them what they would pay for if they had to buy it on the open market at a fair value, and then use the money for the Santa Clara East Basin and the people in Bouquet Canyon. So really what I'd like, and Tom Bunn, if you're still involved, is I would like to hear your input, and would you be willing to go to the Santa Clarita Water Company management and consider having a position that would allow you to take a seat at the table in the negotiations that we'd like to do with Department of Water and Power. Callie, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I guess I do want to see either Rick or Tom if there are any closing comments there.
Yes, this is Tom. I do have some.
Thank you.
I read the application a little bit differently than Roger does. I don't read this application as an application to divert and store and then take this water for LADWP. I think they represented it as an application to continue what they implied that they're doing, although they're not, which is to store the water and then release it according to their agreement with United Water. So I think that denying the application by the water board is not going to do any good because it's not water that LA would otherwise take. That just means that they'll continue to do whatever they do without a permit. I do think, however, that in terms of what the water board can do, this application is limited to a particular place of use, which is releasing it downstream. So they're continuing to do what they're doing now, which is taking it for themselves, maybe. Adding to that aqueduct thing would be in violation of that permit. And I think that we could ask the water board to add that as a condition to the permit, that they have to release it in accordance with the schedule in the agreement with United Water. I think that's just about the only jurisdiction that the water board would have. Now, I'm talking about the litigation solution first before talking about the negotiated solution, but obviously I think we should speak with LADWP and see whether this can be resolved in advance. I think that Mr. Moody at the water board correctly said that they want to get protests resolved by negotiations, but if they're not resolved, then there's a public hearing. And I think that the Groundwater Sustainability Agency would be in a position to weigh in at that public hearing. And it has an interest, certainly, because that water is supposed to come down and recharge the groundwater. And if what we're doing is seeking a plan for groundwater sustainability, then we want to preserve any sources of recharge to the groundwater that we can. So I think that we have standing in a legal sense to make that argument to the water board. So I guess, but one question is whether we should be getting involved in this, whether it is appropriate for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency to be commenting on projects. And I think that's got to be decided by the board of the GSA. So you're talking about a negotiated solution, Roger, and I'm not sure how to put that in a recommendation to the GSA, but we could certainly, an alternative would be to say that the GSA should communicate with the water board and say that they should only grant this application if LAD does to its contract with United Water. And then I think we'd get into conversations about how they do that, because I believe it's their position that they're not able to release the amounts of water that they've contracted to release. So that's what. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, the issue of, there is built into the contract that if they, in 1 year, they reduce less than the amount for whatever reason, they need to make it up in the future, and particularly is considered the following year. We're talking about 11,000 acre feet of water. And that's not going to be released into that stream in one fell swoop in 1 year. It's going to take a long time. It's 15 years of not releasing water. It's going to take 15 years to release water, say at a couple hundred square feet, well, 750 acre feet of water a year on the average for the past 15 years. You can't release, if you add 2,100 and 750, let's say 2,800 acre feet of water a year, you just can't release water into that stream without flooding the road. Even if you have the stream dredged, which that's been the hang up. You can't dredge it because of environmental considerations. So I don't think that trying to just implement the contract as written is a realistic and practical solution. Basically, I think, why don't we just sell them the water? Why give it to them for free? Why don't we just sell them the water, what they would pay to Metropolitan Water District, or what Santa Clarita would have to pay if they had to buy water per acre feet at a fair, and determine that, and then use that money for projects within the East Basin. Number one, to fund a pipeline, which apparently, if I heard Mr. Atkins correctly, it's already been engineered. They just need to find a source of funding for it, and it's about $3 million. And there's environmental projects that could be done, certainly to restore habitats for endangered species, or to clear out invasive weeds, or landscape certain parts, or enhance the riparian areas within the sub-basin. And certainly there's probably going to be money left over just to buy water on the open market and put it into the ground in the sub-basin, and we've got our water. You don't have to litigate. Nobody's losing money. Nobody's making a profit, and we're solving all the problems in a timely fashion. It's a timely, environmentally sensitive, and equitable solution. I don't think it involves litigation, and all it takes is good faith negotiations on both sides to come up with what is a fair market value for an acre foot of water.
Well, if I may, Holly.
Yes, please.
Do at least one more round of this. I think the problem is in the GSA selling him the water is that the water does not belong to the GSA. It may be that the people who protested the application have prior water rights, and they could seek compensation for being denied that. But the Groundwater Sustainability Agency doesn't have any right to that water, and no right to being compensated for it.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I agree. This would be the Santa Clarita Water Company, which you're on the legal staff of. I agree with that, and I just want to know if you'd like to have a seat at the table. I can also approach, or may also approach the United Water Conservation District. Maybe they're interested in having a seat at the table and getting some of that money. Although most of the water stays within the Saugus Aquifer, it doesn't spill out into the Ventura River, but they definitely are the co-signers to the management, to the agreement. So, you know, they probably, I think, might want to take a seat at the table. And then as far as beneficial third parties, we've already gotten, or I've already gotten a very reputable legal entity up in Oakland that has negotiated and is very knowledgeable about water rights and things like that. And they feel the reason we protested, and actually our protest was accepted. The reason our protest was accepted is because they do feel that we have a right to this water, even though we're not signatures to the contract. We have a right to the water as beneficial third parties, and we are harmed by the not releasing the water. I don't want to sue anybody. I just want to negotiate our way out of this. And LADWP isn't going to lose money. They're paying what they would pay Metropolitan Water District, or maybe a little more than what they buy untreated water for anyhow. And then they treat it and they add it on, and they pass on all their expenses to their ratepayers, and their ratepayers pay. But we're not making any money on this. It's just a question of whether Santa Clarita Water wants to have a seat at the table or not, and I don't know. Maybe you don't.
Well, what action are you requesting the GSA to, or what action are you requesting the advisory committee to recommend to the GSA?
Well, what I would, it would be very helpful, in addition to Santa Clarita Water Company be a part of the negotiating team with LADWP, it would be very helpful, I think, if the GSA board, I don't think the advisory committee is the appropriate venue, but if the board and the advisory committee could recommend to the board, but I think the GSA board, it'd be very nice if they wrote a letter in support of equitable negotiations on a timely basis and environmentally sensitive. I think it would facilitate the negotiations.
Ship it back to you, Holly, now for committee comment, unless anybody has questions.
Yeah, any questions or comments right out of the gate here? And then we'll come back to full committee discussion. I do see that Lynn has her hand up. I don't know if that's previous or if that's new.
Dan has a question.
What's that?
Dan has a question.
Oh, sorry, Dan. We'll have a question. Get to do questions, and then we'll do public comment, and then we'll have a discussion.
A combination of things. One is we need to do everything possible to keep the water here in the valley, not to sell it, particularly in the future as we move forward, but also to recover the 11,000 acre feet. You know, maybe an analysis needs to be done as to how much could be released for recharge here locally. I'm reminded that back in the day when I was negotiating with the United Water Conservation District regarding releases from flood flows from Castaic Lake, they want releases, they wanted pulse flows. They wanted one big release because that would minimize recharge in the upper part of the basin and maximize the amount of water that they would get. We wanted the opposite, nice slow releases. As far as selling the water, you know, to build facilities to get it back up in Bouquet, you know, the 11 million would get spent awfully fast, but you know, the amount of water we have here, it's a zero-sum game. This is an opportunity to add to the groundwater supply we have here, as opposed to selling that water and then using water that would be otherwise used somewhere else in the valley and having to pump it all the way up to Bouquet, because it's not just construction costs, it's also pumping, you know, the operating costs and the power costs. The other thing that I recall, I understand the restrictions associated with the release. There were some, if I remember correctly, unarmored three-spine stickleback issues, or there was concerns about impacts to the unarmored three-spine stickleback. Obviously, that would need to be dealt with. But also, if I remember correctly, the releases were limited because of some road infrastructure, or I think Roger alluded to it, which facilities operated by the county, where if that was rectified, it would allow for more releases than are being made right now. But I think that's one of the things that we can actually pursue or request the county to look into to enhance our groundwater supplies and the sustainability of our groundwater supplies. If it allows more water from Bouquet to be released and for beneficial use here locally, in particular up Bouquet Canyon.
Can I respond to that? With regard to pulse flows or one big flow or a low flow, we'll take the water whatever way we can get it in a timely fashion. The problem with the stickleback is that it thrives in low flow water, so I don't know if they would take one big release of a couple of 1,000 acre feet every 6 months or something like that and just flood it out, because it would just wash everything downstream. Secondly, we've been there and done all of that, Dan. I personally participated in 13 quarterly meetings chaired by John Miller, who is a water engineer from Department of Water and Power, and consisted of a representative from LA County Department of Public Works, from United Water Conservation District, from the California State Department of Fish and Game. We have involved our local congressman, who was Buck McKeon at the time, at the national level. We've involved even Dianne Feinstein's office with her field rep, and she came up and we went over to the residential community, which is Lark Ranch, and talked to them. There's just been no resolution. There's just been no resolution. And finally, after the 13th quarterly meeting, Mr. Miller, who's the Department of Water and Engineering, Department of Water and Power, says to go forward. We would walk away from a quarterly meeting saying National Forest is going to permit county to do the work, and it just wouldn't happen. So I think we've been there and we've done that. And as far as the storage, you can take storage in two different ways. You can say that, 11,000 acre feet of that reservoir is 36,000. That's almost a third of that now is water that's stored for us. I mean, in another 10 or 15 years, the purpose that they built that dam isn't going to store that water. Or when we met with Department of Water and Power, the engineer down there said, you know what? We can't separate one molecule of water from the other. We don't know which came from the Owens Valley, and we don't know which is rainwater. So it's quite possible, in fact, it's quite probable, that 11 million acre feet of water have already gone down into their system and passed through two power plants. They've not only taken the untreated rainwater, treated it and sold it, but they generated electricity with it. And the water that's up there now, I think they consider the 36,000 acre feet as their water from the Owens River or the Owens Valley.
Holly,
Yeah.
this is Steve Cole. I know this is a passionate issue for sure for people that are in the canyon, and the water agency is participating in trying to move a solution forward. But as Roger mentioned, it's really cumbersome. But I guess what I'd ask is that the committee, focus on, is there something that you would like the GSA board to consider on this issue? And it could be as simple as Roger laid out. We can draft if the committee would like the board to consider drafting a letter to elevate the understanding and resolution of this issue. First and foremost, I look at this in like different components. You've got the water rights application that is active and moving, and then you have solutions, and they're kind of interrelated but moving at different paces. So I would just ask the committee focus in, if you're supportive of the GSA board hearing the issue, the staff would be happy to prepare something that we can present to them about how to properly weigh in on the issue.
Yeah, that was sort of where I was headed. I want to just take a couple of comments here. Sandra, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to let you know that I guess around, 8 years ago, Tom Lackey had a bill, which was the bouquet fix. And they're dragging their feet on it to get the creek realigned and to make sure that there's a protected area for sticklebacks when the reservoir does go back to full flow. I would also like to mention, advocate for the fact that if there's any money involved, if part of that money or part of that water does get sold, that it should go to the well owners, especially the Lombardis, the Herrings, maybe Lark Ranch, who had to put out the money to repipe or to pipe in water, because they're the people that were impacted by this. Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, quickly,
First
please.
of all, Steve, I think your offer to have the board consider this solution is a good one. And I would, if the advisory committee is willing to recommend to the board that they consider the issue, and without saying what the board would recommend or not recommend, I think it ought to, I would love to have it be brought to the board and see if they would consider writing a letter of support to the Department of Water Resources for the position of a negotiated solution. And it was made clear to me by Mr. Moody that only the three protesters can be in a position to negotiate because they're the only ones that protested. So you could be on a team that, if you would like, you can be on a team that negotiates things. Secondly, from my own standpoint, I would like to have the water. If I had my druthers, I'd rather have the water, but it needs to be on a timely basis. If it comes down to money instead of water, you know, I put in 15 years of volunteer work and some legal fees and things like that. I'd be willing, I shouldn't say this, but I'd be willing to just, you know, take a nominal amount of money for that, but I'm not looking for a lot of money. And my brother-in-law, I don't think is looking for a lot of money either, although I can't speak for him because he lost a significant book of business when Lombardi Ranch no longer could go into business because they didn't have any water to grow pumpkins.
Yeah, so Roger, I'm going to pause there and just say, I think that what, well, I'm going to do the public comment and then I'll come back. So Lynn, you said you did want to comment if I heard correctly.
Yeah, I know Roger's correct in that this was a long and drawn out process, but I thought they did reach some sort of resolution that involved mitigation area and cleaning out the stream. I don't know what happened to that. And when I've been up there, I just would like to ask him, because he lives there, there are so many wells in that creek. Are all those wells permitted? I mean, there's just like, there must be thousands of homeowner wells in that creek.
Well, I can't say that there are thousands, and I can't speak to whether they're permitted. I can tell you that we've never, I'm assuming that they're all legal or permitted, whatever that takes. I can't tell you. I don't think anybody drilled a well up there without a permit that I know of. Certainly we didn't.
Okay, so I think Steve, you know what, I'm going to appreciate your comments there, and Tom, and maybe if it pleases the committee, we might take the recommendation that Roger says and just say to the actual advisory, to the actual groundwater committee, sustainability committee, that they consider, you know, as he said, consider weighing in support of a negotiated solution. I guess I would caution against defining what we think that negotiated solution might be, simply because I think this is clearly intricate, and I'm not sure we're in a position to do that as a advisory committee. But perhaps we might say to them that they, that they want to take this up for consideration, and then staff could prepare, prepare a letter or prepare some background on this for them. That said, this is, Tom, I guess I'd like your take on, this advisory committee was formed for a specific person or purpose around the plan, so I don't want to really go out of scope, although I certainly personally concur with Dan's point of let's try to keep as much of the water in our basin as we can. So maybe Tom or Steve, you could respond a little bit to, the best direction and appropriate direction given our charter.
Well, I think that question really is going to have to be decided by the GSA board, what they believe their scope to be, and whether it includes commenting on projects. My view of what the advisory committee does is that it can get involved in everything the GSA does and provide input with regard to those decisions. And I also think, as I said before, that the agency board could decide that they have an interest in this because the water's going to go to recharge the basin and add to the sustainability of the basin. But I think ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to make the decision about scope. I think if this committee wants to weigh in, they can go ahead and do that.
I would concur with Tom, Holly, if you don't mind me. That sounds like a reasonable thing to do. If the advisory committee wants to bump this up to the board through some type of memo or without even taking a position, just say, we've got a problem, can you help? Do you want to take a position on a solution, and then have a board discuss it? I would hope they would support the solution, but I can't guarantee it. But I think the board is the appropriate place for that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's that any actually weighing in is outside of our purview and authority. But so I guess then the question for Tom and perhaps Steve is do we need a motion from this committee's advisory committee to say something to the effect of, this issue has come to our attention in the scope of our work. We believe it is something you guys should decide on whether it is within, actionable or appropriate to take action by the groundwater sustainability board itself. I may not have groundwater sustainability agency. Sorry, I'm trying to get my terms right. Do we need a motion for that, or is that simply something that can be conveyed?
If it needs a motion, I'll make a motion. If it can be conveyed, that'd be fine. Maybe Tom can help me on if it requires a motion in framing the motion. That
I don't. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I'm trying to think of whether certainly a motion would be appropriate, whether it's also possible to communicate it informally to the GSA. The only concern with that is I'd like to make sure that all the committee members are heard. We've only heard from some of them so far, and one way they can be heard is voting on a motion.
Yeah, I mean, I think my preference, Tom, is just a consensus. If we can reach consensus. So Holly, if you can request that if there's any objections for the GSA board hearing this, then we should hear it now. But I don't hear anybody saying we shouldn't at least have the GSA board consider weighing in on the issue. And if that's the case, we will prepare something for the next GSA board meeting to do that.
Okay, so with that, thank you for that, Steve. I think that if unless there's any concerns about staff conveying to the GSA board that this issue was brought to our attention, we think it's relevant to the overall goals of groundwater sustainability in the valley, and we think they ought to determine whether and potentially how to opine in this matter. Are there any concerns about us doing that or other discussion or questions? Silence is golden and assumed consent. Since this is not a formal.
Well, do you want to
motion.
vote on it?
Okay, no, I think that staff now has plenty of direction and we can go forward from there.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we'll have it be a staff communication at this time, and I appreciate that. So thanks for the informative presentation there, Roger, and your preparation on that.
Well, you're welcome. Just one little quick point. Is it inappropriate for me to work with Steve and Tom in whatever they do, or would it be better if they did it on their own and I not be involved?
I will leave that to council.
Okay, that's fine. Tom, it's up to you. I'm happy to be a resource for you if you'd like, but I don't want to complicate or muddy the waters.
Well, could he read it after they come up with it so that they don't, the dog, the dog and pony, and that the pony doesn't step on the dog?
Okay, that's fine.
I'm not sure I've heard that expression before, Dennis. But yeah, I'm going to just leave it to the offer stands, Steve and Tom, from Roger. I think we want to make sure that we just are adhering to appropriate procedures here. So I'll leave it at that. So with that, are there any other requests from members of the committee for future other agenda items? Item 4. Then with that, Tara, unless there is something else, I believe we can move to item 5, which is adjournment.
There's nothing else.
All right. Thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll be doing this again at the workshop in the beginning of August. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm leaving.